FDIC insured money market account. Is he correct?
Screen. As I mentioned, it is insured.
Is it
is not a
insured
CDR.
FDIC?
It is not a CDR.
Okay. It's not FDIC insured. Okay. So it's not insured by the United States government. Completely different issue. Colette, I believe you mentioned, and I'm not sure I understood what you said. I believe you said that there was a 6-to-1 vote by email to approve a lease with secrets. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If that is correct, then we don't have a contract with secrets because all email, non-meeting actions taken by this board of directors must be unanimous. A 6-to-1 vote in an email vote is illegal, not only under our bylaws, but under Maryland corporate law. We've been through this before. We keep plowing the same ground over and over. I'm not sure what board member objected, but we don't have a contract with secrets.
We need the 7-0 to go to an electronic vote, which we did have. We had a 6-to-1 on the motion itself.
In a meeting,
An email vote. An
that's
email
not
vote.
legal. I believe you better check with your lawyer.
We'll
Believe me.
double check, but to back up what Colette says, that process is a two-step process.
So-
The first process is to agree to take the vote
Okay.
via email. That's 7-0. That's a requirement. It must be unanimous.
Okay.
All right? And then the second process is to actually submit the motion for discussion and a final vote.
I'm not going to argue legal issues with you, but I will only say this. We've been through this at least 4 times in the past 25 years or so. Every time the board of directors makes the same mistake, the law requires that the action taken be unanimous, and if you ask your lawyer, he'll tell you that. So please do so.
Joe, in fairness, I will get an answer for you and follow up.
Okay. One more item on the legal fees for DRs. I believe Mr. Daly is going to propose a motion that would look into a change in the declarations of restrictions that would allow the board of directors to do something it cannot currently do, and that is a change in the DRs that would say if the board of directors takes, say, an association member to court on a DR violation, that the person taken to court would be liable for OPA's legal fees. I don't have any objection to that in principle. Frankly, it doesn't amount to much because despite talk by the board in the newspapers about $25,000 to $50,000 costs related to collecting fees, I spoke to one of the attorneys that was collecting fees for us, and they were charging $550 to file down at the county. And if my information is correct, no one ever challenged those charges, and OPA won every case. So there was no big money involved here. However, again, I have no objection to a DR that changes to allow OPA to collect legal fees if OPA goes to court. Here's my question. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. If OPA decides to sue an association member in court for a DR violation, I submit that any DR change should provide reciprocal protection for the member, so that if the OPA sues the member in court and the member wins, OPA should pay the member's legal fees.
Joe, I'm sorry. Let me interrupt you, because I am a lawyer. The determination of the assignment of legal fees is a matter for the court and not a matter for the individual litigants. One litigant can ask for attorney's fees, and one litigant can say, no, I don't want to pay those attorney's fees, and that becomes a matter of judicial discretion, and that is up to the judge. It is not as easy as you might portray. It is not to say that because an OPA member sues us for legal fees that they're going to be granted, nor is the converse of that true. And so I don't want to, as a lawyer, I don't want to leave you with any kind of supposition that just because you want it doesn't make it so.
With all due respect, I believe that you're not looking at the issue properly. Currently, the board, any court has the option, if you ask, to give legal fees. What we're looking for is a declaration of restrictions change that will allow the Ocean Pines Association itself, outside the court, to bill the member for legal fees and charge it to that member as we charge an assessment. Is that what you're looking for, Frank?
Well, just to be clear, we have asked current counsel and past counsel if we can collect the legal fees, ask the court for legal fees when we go for non-collection items.
Right.
Both current counsel and past counsel agree that the absence of those words in our declarations of restrictions preclude us from requesting that.
Right.
That's why we're putting it in there. And counsel also, like counsel next to me, basically has said, keep in our own lane. We would be best off not to tell the court what to do just in case something goes a different way.
Absolutely.
Well, there are associations in the state of Maryland that have a provision within their declarations of restrictions that allow the association to collect the legal fees from the membership.
All right. Guys, I'm going to limit to one more comment, and we got to move on. We have
Sorry.
exceeded the 5
All I'm
minutes. So,
saying
Joe,
is-
one more comment, make it 30 seconds.
Talk to your attorney about it before you go passing anything. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Other public comments?
Good evening. Jack Collins, 66 Skyline Court. Hi, guys. As a past member of the board, I too want to compliment the administration that has been put together by this board over the last, 18 months. Fantastic report, and it evolves each and every month and becomes better each and every month. I wasn't trying to be a nibbish and get into your business, but if you're dealing with a large institution, large financial institution, they do have short-term securities, and they're treasury bills. And they can use those treasury instruments as collateral against your 11.1 million to you evolve those funds into the various CDs or what have you. In the past, what we were doing is we were receiving federal agency stock, which happened to be Farmers Home Loan, something or other. And we decided back then that that was not a good program. So I just point that out to you as a point of information.
Jack, and as I said, not to interrupt you, but as I said, that's not how this is being insured. And the money is being shared with, I believe, that allows for it to be insured.
Perfect. Because you never know what's going to happen. Right. You just don't. I rise in opposition to a motion that's going to be put before this board at the end of the evening, I guess, concerning the control of rental units in our neighborhoods.
Jack, point
I
of order.
think
That motion was stricken from tonight's agenda. We're waiting
Then,
for,
then I withdraw any future comments that I would make about that particular issue.
and again,
And
going back
I
to
will
the-
sit down right
I'm not
now.
asking you to sit down. No, but that's the hearing will be on the 15th, and then we'll probably follow up accordingly.
Thanks, Jack.
But thank you, Jack. Other public comments? Seeing none, I'll close the floor for public comments. Move on to our next agenda item, and that is capital purchase requests. We have none slated for this month, so we'll move into the next item on the agenda. That's CPI violations. John?
Okay, so the first one, 34 Bridgewater Road, violation, debris and high grass. Recommendation, sent to OPA attorney for action.
I'll entertain a motion to find 34 Bridgewater Road in continuing violation.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second,
Any discussion?
just one. Note, from the time of the initial inspection to the time the board has taken any kind of action to clear it with the attorney is 14 weeks.
Higher now. There's also debris on on the thing, and parked vehicles in the lot.
All right, look, guys, let me say, while I took a very flexible approach to public comments, when we make comments on the board, please be recognized by the chair before we make comments. So, any other comments on this particular item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of finding 34 Bridgewater Road in continuing violation, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? John, next one.
Yep. 8 Juneway Lane, violation, maintenance, high grass weeds, unregistered vehicle.
I'll entertain a motion to find 8 Juneway Lane in continuing violation.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion.
Same discussion, 14 weeks.
Noted. Other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of finding 8 Juneway Lane in continuing violation, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. John, next one, please.
Okay, might have a typo up there, but it's 28 Bird Nest Drive, violation, maintenance and debris. Recommendation, sent to OPA attorney for action.
I'll entertain a motion to find 28 Bird Nest Drive in continuing violation.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion.
13 weeks.
Noted. Other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of finding 28 Bird's Nest Drive in continuing violation, please say aye.
Am I missing
Aye.
one up
Aye.
there?
Any
I'm
opposed?
missing 42
Thank you.
Brandlewood.
Next item.
Michelle, I'm missing 42 Brandlewood. Okay, I'm going to skip one. I'm going to go to 44 Brandywine Drive, violation, debris, sent to OPA attorney for action.
Entertain a motion to find 44 Brandywine Drive in continuing violation.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion.
11 weeks.
Getting better. Other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of finding 44 Brandywine Drive in continuing violation, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Next item, John.
Okay, so let's go back. 42 Brandlewood Drive, violation, maintenance, debris. Recommendation, sent to OPA attorney for action.
I'll entertain a motion to find 42 Bramblewood Drive in continuing violation.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion.
13 weeks.
Noted. Other questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of finding 42 Bramblewood Drive in continuing violation, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? John, next item, please.
Okay, so last one, 58 Seafarer Lane, violation, maintenance. Recommendation, sent to OPA attorney.
I'll entertain a motion to find 58 Seafarer Lane in continuing violation.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion.
14 weeks.
I have a question. If this has anybody gone out to this property and talked to these people? I mean, they've signed all the letters that have been sent certified mail. Have we actually gone out and spoke to them and seen if we could help them out with this? I mean, it's just a matter of cleaning the gutters
Right.
and cutting the grass. They've signed every letter. They're up to date on their assessments. Is there an opportunity for somebody from CPI to actually knock on the door and see what's going on? If there's somebody needs some help, or if we can assist them, or I don't know. I'm just asking.
Before we move forward, I'll ask that we suspend Robert's rules and allow someone to answer a question.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Robert's rules are considered suspended right now.
Kobe?
Please, microphone, please.
To answer your question, when we get something in that we can go and contact the homeowner on, that we try and do that. Maintenance issues, if they don't address it, we are not allowed to go on the property to take care of the issue unless we have a court order to do so. So until that changes. That's why we can't just go on and cut the grass and
Yeah,
whatnot.
and I don't mean to put you on the spot, and I don't mean go on and do it, but if somebody actually got on the phone and talked, because obviously they're somewhere, because they're picking up the mail, they're not behind in us. It's unlike a lot of them where they're behind in assessments and you know they probably don't care. But these, at least they're current, they've paid, they've answered every certified mail in there. So it's just, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. It's just,
No.
has anybody grabbed a
Yeah,
phone
yeah,
number and called?
Tom, I'm going to jump in, I'm going to help you. First of all, Kobe, thank you for coming tonight and helping out. So there is an initial inspection, I do believe, that, now I wasn't there on all of these or whatever. There is an initial inspection, there are letters sent, this has been going on, this is the way it's been approached for years, Tom. That's why what Frank is bringing forward, I believe, will definitely help. I do understand, I've been on some of these where our guys will not go on the property. I can't blame them. Even the police say that we shouldn't go on there. But there is an initial inspection. I'm reading it right here. There are the letters. And that's why I think Frank's right to some degree on this thing, that we need to adjust accordingly. All righty? But no, it's a good question, but
It's an individual basis situation.
there is an
but if you look at
inspection.
all of them, it's like, who cares? You know, they're not going to answer no matter what. This one in particular seems like these
Right.
people actually are around. Maybe they're just sick and they can't get down. I don't know. I mean, it seems to me, if you called a Realtor, they could get their number in about a second and a half.
Well,
Just saying.
Other discussion while we had Robert's Rules suspended,
Thank-
Joe.
Kobe,
Thanks,
thank you.
Joe.
Thank you, Colby. I'm sorry.
The Board of Directors should read the declarations of restrictions for Ocean Pines. I don't know the exact language, but it reads something like this. With a 2/3 vote of the Ocean Pines Board of Directors, 4/5, whatever it is, more than a more normal majority, this Board of Directors can vote to go onto a property without going to court. You can't remove personal property. You can go onto that property without going to court, cut the grass. As a matter of fact, if you talk to Joe Moore, our prior attorney, you'll find that one of the homes, when you go into the golf course, make a left turn off the parkway, right, depending on which way you're going. OPA went in there, put a new roof on the place, new siding, put down sod, redid the entire driveway, and sent the guy a bill. We have the authority, the guidelines give the general manager fast-track authority. Frank's sitting there saying 12 weeks, 13 weeks, 15 weeks. The general manager has the board authority to bring these problems to the board immediately. There's no reason to have these things for 13 weeks. Do what you have the authority to do and don't keep putting it off. We go through this year after year. Thank you.
Point taken. All right, seeing any other discussion, I'd like to reinstate Robert's Rules of Order. Any opposed? Any opposed to that? All right, consider Robert's Rules reinstated. Any other discussion on the finding 58 Seafair and continuing violation? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of finding 58 Seafair Lane and continuing violation, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. That concludes the CPI violations. We'll move into the next item of business, which is unfinished business, which we have none from the previous meeting. So we'll move into new business. First, there's a motion on the floor by myself. I'd like to move to rename the Marlin Room in the Community Center to the Anna Foltz Room. Purpose and effect, the name change will memorialize Anna Foltz and recognize her for the contribution she has made to our community. The background is Anna Foltz's contributions and volunteer spirit that she demonstrated should be recognized, and the name dedication of the meeting room will serve that purpose. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Good. Seeing none. Seeing none. I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I dare say anybody opposed. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, that'll be nice. And then that's in conjunction with what I mentioned earlier about the dedication ceremony from Star Charities on the 24th at 3 p.m., Josh, right? So, and more details on that to follow. Thank you. Next item on the agenda was a motion for asking the Worcester County Commissioners to lay a vote on Bill 19.3, which was stricken based on our changing or amending the agenda for tonight. So the next item on the agenda was discussion to replace with the marquee information signs. Colette.
Yes, the topic is replacement of the 13 marquee information signs within our community with 2 electronic signs, one at the north gate and one at the south gate. Concise statement, the Communications Advisory Committee, in consultation with the OPA Director of Marketing and Public Relations, is recommending replacement of the marquee information signs located along Ocean Parkway, on Manklin Creek Road near the Racket Sports Complex, and on Cathell Road near the Sports Corps Pool with 2 electronic signs. The purpose is to promote easier maintenance of the information they provide. Although this action falls within the responsibility of the GM, the purpose of this discussion is to present the concept to the board and to the membership, to solicit input on the topic, to assess the value of doing further research on options for replacement signs, and to determine the value of including the cost in the upcoming budget. Background. Although the marquee signs are presently in good repair, the maintenance of the information on the signs presents challenges to OPA staff. Presently, 4 different departments are responsible for keeping the information current at a total of approximately 1 staff day per week. In addition, when situations occur that result in last-minute cancellation of weekend or holiday events, the person responsible for changing the information must gain access to the necessary materials on the weekend, which sometimes is difficult. Finally, the process of changing the information poses risk of injury to the staff member due to the weight of the glass covering that must be raised and propped up by a 2x4 board while the letters are put in place. The proposal is to replace the 13 signs with 2 electronic signs at a cost of approximately $40,000 each. The benefits include the ability to maintain the accuracy and timeliness of the information electronically from the marketing department office or remotely any day, anytime. The challenges to this proposal include concerns about light pollution after dark and the cost. Further research is needed to determine options to address these issues. I'm going to just cut this short. Additional challenges come from Worcester County permitting and zoning issues. Current Worcester County Code restricts message signs only to the identification of the community or geographic region. Furthermore, there are no variances or exceptions that can be obtained. Although OPA signs presently go beyond this to provide information about programs and activities, according to Jennifer Keener, Worcester County zoning administrator, the county has never pressed the issue of removing what has been in existence. Additionally, she indicates that she could not permit new or replacement signs. Advice from Ed Tudor, the Worcester County Director of Permitting, is that a text amendment to a county code could accomplish the objective of replacing our current signs with something new, such as electronic signs. The text amendment could be approved if the wording limits the change to a community with specific characteristics, such as number of homes, such that it does not impact the entire county. This discussion topic is presented in order to determine board and homeowner support for pursuing this concept and going to the work of overcoming the zoning and permitting problems.
All right, seeing this is a discussion item, I will open the floor for discussion.
I would like to,
Camille.
thank you. I would just like to say that I think that the signs that we have on the Parkway and in other places are very quaint, and they are almost nostalgic, but I really do support the continuing investigation of this discussion. I think that sometimes we do have experiences where changes in plans need to be made expeditiously rather than having someone with the appropriate lettering materials go out and change the signs in some sort of timely format. So I would really encourage us to continue to explore this, to look at the cost-benefit analysis, and to consider the purchase of these signs, barring any restrictions by any codes that are imposed on us by Worcester County or our own restrictions or bylaws.
Yeah, I have a comment. So with regard to the costs, I'm very much interested in that. I think the estimates right now are 80 grand. So how long does it take us to recoup that investment? Because again, you're measuring labor hours, for not only carrying out things, but actually keeping it up to date, versus an investment of 80K that should, when are we going to see the return on that investment? Where's the break-even point? And then the second part of it is, what other costs will we have to incur to actually change from a manual sign to an electronic sign? Well, obviously, you have to need to go to dare I say, Comcast, or some other service provider to get information so we're connected from a homing point, in which case is probably an administration building, out to the signs in order to do that. So there's a couple of more costs involved in that. And I think it's very important that we understand the entire cost and then the return on that investment. When is it going to pay it back? And is it, quite frankly, is it worth it? I'm not poo-pooing it. I'm just saying, if you tell me it's going to be 27 years before we can pay back the labor costs, I'm not really sure that, I can sort of propose a value set associated with that. But if it's something along the lines of, I freed up X amount of hours worth of labor and I can apply it against, deficiency in the labor area in another part of the operation, okay, then maybe we can look at that. But that's one of my, I don't call it concern, just something that I'd like to get at least a little more information on. So, other comments? I think Larry, please.
Yeah, first off, for this issue, I'm not so sure a cost-benefit analysis is the appropriate thing to deal with here. This is really something that adds to the quality of life in Ocean Pine. So, yeah, whether there's a real cost-benefit besides the service provided to the community, I'm not so sure. From a financial standpoint, if that's really the issue. But my concern is that I know this issue was addressed, it's probably 4 years ago. I can remember Marty Clark making a big issue about this, and the county was intransient on making the changes. I think it's probably a good thing if we could get the signs, but until the codes are changed, I mean, we're just spinning our wheels. So if the discussion here is to put a group together, have our general manager put a group together with our attorney to try to influence the county, I think that's a good thing. But at this point, until that happens, I don't think there's anything we can do.
Other comments? Frank, you're next.
All good something to explore, but I think there's a couple practical things. If you're not going to look at a cost-benefit analysis, then the argument becomes it's a safety issue because you can get messages out to the community faster in a critical situation. In that case, you need 3 signs, not 2, because St. Martin's Neck Road also has to be covered. And the likelihood of, I'll just say it, a possibility that road may be more heavily traveled in the future, particularly if at some point in the distant future, a traffic circle is put at the North Gate. So there's 3 signs, not 2.
Excuse me, parliamentary procedure, discussion remains up here, Robert's Rules of Order are in place.
So-
Continue, Frank.
Multiple signs. The other thing, and it's agreed, if the county says no, the answer, and they're not going to move, then we'd be wasting our time and effort. And the other question, just issue that pops out immediately is, I have a pretty good gut level feel that the replacement reserve for our manual signs is nowhere near $80,000.
All right, other comments? Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I like the little quaint signs throughout the parkway as well. My question would be, and as far as a cost-benefit analysis, I mean, what it would do would be used to bring people into our community and bring them into the yacht club. When we did, in the environmental committee, when we decided we were going to put roofs over top of all the mailboxes, first thing we did was went out, figured out how much it was going to cost to build a building over top of it with a roof and with a light. So without knowing whether this is really $40,000, how big it is, I don't know if it's a 10 by 10 electric sign or a 40 by 40 billboard on each side of Ocean Pines. I mean, I really have no idea. So maybe a little bit more information so we truly know with a picture of the sign and where it would go and where you'd set it and a total amount exactly of what the cost of the sign, because there's always going to be the extra cost of hooking it up and electric on it as well. And I would just need to see all that before I could even think about saying yes or no. So,
Colette?
Did you want to say something first?
I did, but you can go first if you want.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. I have a couple questions or concerns, I guess. I do think it's a lot of money. I also have a concern about who's going to do it. If we're going to add more work onto our staff, because in my experience over the last couple of months being pretty involved in a lot of things around here, our staff are worked pretty heavily right now, and I'm not sure that getting them involved and going to the county and trying to work on a permit is worthwhile. Another point, I was the contact person for a lot of the Rotary, and I checked on something today. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration of the U.S. Department of Transportation says, any distraction over 2 seconds is a potential cause of crashes or near crashes. I've stopped when I've seen these big electronic billboards, and you start looking at the thing, and then all of a sudden, the guy behind you is blowing his horn. You know, I don't want people in our community stopping to read the sign as it's scrolling around and changing and all that, and causing accidents.
I have a response to that, but Colette.
I was just going to kind of bring the discussion to a close,
Yeah, good idea.
if we're ready.
Go ahead.
You know, basically, it sounds like we've got opinions on both sides on the board, but the board is not opposed to getting some more information about this to answer some of these concerns and to kind of take it to the next step to see how difficult or easy it may be to get that text revision with the county. I agree that we don't want to put an inordinate amount of staff time into this, but it's really the GM's call as to, you know, how he wants to allocate his resources to do the research that we need to really get all these questions answered.
Could I recommend?
Excuse me,
I'm sorry.
need to be recognized by the chair.
Yes, sir.
Camille.
Thank you. Could I recommend that we put together some sort of short-term task force to investigate what it's going to need, what kind of man-hours it would take, what the cost-benefit analysis might be, and to bring a discussion back to the board at a meeting 3 months hence?
And the communications committee exists for that purpose.
Okay.
I was going to say.
Tom?
Yeah, I was going to say, the communications committee can put together all this information. That's what you guys meet together to do. You came up with the idea, so if they could do it without involving any of our staff and spending any staff dollars, that would be great. Get all the information, all the dollar figures, all where you're going to do it, and then bring that back to the board, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, let me emphatically state that that's one of the reasons why we have advisory committees. There's no reason to reach down into staff time in order to do things that an advisory committee is built and set up to do. So I would offer, in order to close discussion, anybody else has any other salient points, I'd like to say perhaps we refer this to the the communications committee, get their opinion, read them the text, and then let them review what we've talked about already, and pull together a meeting at some point, maybe, I don't know, we'll have 2 months, maybe, we'll see what happens, but let's let the communications.
This was originated
Yeah.
by communications.
Let's
and
let the
they
communications
yeah, they
advisory
asked me to
committee
come to the board
make
to
a recommendation to
determine
us. All right,
there
seeing
was the will.
very good. Seeing no more discussion, we'll close the, that item on the agenda. The next item on the agenda has been modified from its original. It's now reading the first reading of M01. Frank.
Okay. Topic, first reading to amend Resolution M01. Attached is Resolution M01, and it's attached to your board packet, with proposed changes that in effect rescind the motion. It will be replaced with Resolution M-10. M-10 is also included in the board packet as a first reading. The effect of these changes is to implement a faster and more effective policy and procedure for addressing violations to the declarations of restrictions and architectural guidelines.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion.
Okay.
Frank.
There's an extensive board packet with information for the board members, which I think is also out on the web and publicly available. But basically, to implement a procedure to, a policy and procedure for faster resolution to violations of our declarations of restrictions, there's 4 steps that have to be taken in lockstep. Rescind M01, a slight revision to M04, a revised resolution to C02, all takes care of the paperwork. Now, to cut to the chase on what this does compared to what happens today, during the violations, I was giving the timelines that takes for the board to act. The net effect of all these changes and the adoption of M010 is this. From the day that there is an initial violation noted to declaration of restrictions, the next day, the CPI department sends a letter that says you have 30 days to correct the violation or show substantial progress toward correcting that violation, or the general manager is authorized to go to the court and get a court order forcing you to comply with the declaration of restriction. That's it in a nutshell. It doesn't change the fact that there's an architectural review meeting and a potential for a variance or a potential for the architectural review committee to listen to the violator and say this is not a violation. Doesn't change anything up to that point. But what it does is compresses the timeline instead of going around and around and around and around and around and around till you have 30 days to correct it.
Other discussion?
I'll just make a comment. I was with, as a liaison to the ARC committee, and they're very supportive of this change and feel like it's really helpful. I think the other thing that it's important to note that the GM has the authority then to go directly to get a court order.
And report to the board.
And report back to the board, but it does not come to the board for a decision.
Right.
So, Robert's rules are still in place. I have a comment. Number one, so Frank, I absolutely agree with this. It was more of a procedural question. Does it make more sense to modify M01, or does it make more sense to basically rescind M01 and add an, M10? And the question would be, should we involve the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee and get their opinion?
I actually have an opinion from them. And
Okay.
basically, their opinion is you could do it either way.
Okay.
Now, their preference to be, absolutely, would be to say, go through and to modify M01. My preference is, I've done all the work on it. If they want to come back to us and say, look, because of something deep inside the bowels of the organization, how the little gears move, that it would be a lot better to take M01 and just incorporate M04 to it, and they want to do that, I would certainly accept that. But at this point, my thing to the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee is, we want to rescind M01 and replace it with M10. If you have a better way to do it and want to come back for the second reading with it, we will accept it.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, would you take the lead on that, and then if you can get the information back from the the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee, and then present that prior to the November meeting, where we'll have the second reading of this?
I could, but I actually think that the way to approach it is, if, from my standpoint, okay, now, there may be something, again, in the little gear procedurally doesn't do it. They know that we want to rescind M01. They know that we want to incorporate M10. If they want to, for some odd reason, keep M01 in the books and incorporate what I have in M04, have at it, and I'll more than gladly accept it, if that's okay with the other six of you. And they can do that at the committee level rather than me do it at the board level and go back and forth.
So, seeing an important gentleman in the audience, I'd ask to rescind Robert's Rules of Order for a moment. Any questions? All those in favor of,
That's fine.
Yes, okay. Rescinding Robert's Rules of Order. Okay, Robert's Rules of Order are suspended. Jim, could you share some of your insight, please?
I'll stand here and speak. I'm chairman of the Bylaws and Resolutions Advisory Committee. The board has to bring this to us for us to consider. We're not going to sit here, I'm not going to sit here and listen to what you say and take it to the committee. Bring it formally to the committee.
Okay. So, all right, Robert's Rules of Order suspended. Joe, please. Please keep it short.
Yeah, I don't really think it's funny, to tell you the truth. I have grave concerns about this motion, Frank, to be perfectly honest with you. If you read the declarations of restrictions, it states that the board, in order to take an action, the board of directors has to declare a member in continuing violation. You're essentially giving that authority to the GM. I think it's a serious problem. This rush to make these changes via board resolutions, somebody needs to consider what the declarations of restrictions say. And again, I'll say it again. This board needs to read the declarations of restrictions. Thank you.
All right, I'll entertain one more question.
We have some people that aren't here all the time. They may not be here for 30 days. They may be sick. You don't know, they could be in a hospital. So how are you going to find that out? You don't want to find somebody that's on death's bed in, you know, one of the hospitals, and that really looks bad for you folks.
Point taken. Point taken. Other comments?
Just to respond to that quickly, in meeting with the ARC committee, if an owner has a situation like that, they can come and talk with ARC or communicate by phone and ask for consideration. And I think the ARC committee is pretty willing to work with people if there's a situation like you described.
Okay, I'd like to reinstate Robert's Rules of Order. I consider it reinstated. Additional questions on the discussion?
Yeah, I just have one. I mean, I assumed when we were talking about this, that what we were doing was, in our initial meeting that we had with Jeremy over at the Beach Club, our initiation meeting, his big concern was that he couldn't, you know, you could go on for a year sending letters and trying to get people to take care of their things, and that's attorney's fees on an hourly basis, whatever our retainer may be. But he could never go after them for that money, even if they never fix their property. And I assumed that's what we wanted to be able to do. I don't understand why we have to have our lawyers working for 6 to 8 months on trying to get people to fix their houses, but can't go after them to pay for our lawyers doing that. That's my point. That was what I thought this was all going to be about, not necessarily saying you got 30 days to do it or we're going to sue you. It was just a matter of, hey, if you don't do this, we can, because we can't now, it's not in our DRs, we are not allowed to go after for legal fees, the legal fees that we pay that are part of that big monster legal number, that lawyer's number that we had 2 years or a year ago. We can't go after them for those legal fees. And that's what I assumed this was going to be. Now, whether, I mean, I have to read through this another couple of times, but that's where I would agree to something like this, and that's where I thought we were going.
Frank?
Let's clarify and put this thing in perspective, which is also in the board package, and give the kind of, what I call real look at how violations of DRs have handled, how the CPI department works and everything like that. First, the department gets up to 12 complaints a day, okay? Of the 12 complaints that they get, the vast majority of those complaints are rectified within 30 days. And in fact, not only are they rectified within 30 days, most of them are rectified over the phone without any formal documentation being given to anybody. So it's not like there's an enormous thing out there. So after, and by the way, in that 30-day period where you try to make contact with the owners, they have 2 opportunities to talk with the ARC because the ARC meets twice a month, okay? So, and there's reach out to the folks from the CPI group to try to talk with them in person and explain what's happening, okay? At the end of the 30 days, right now, or the end of the session, if we follow the current procedures, it then at some point comes to the board, okay? And a letter goes to the attorney, a letter sent from the attorney to the violator. There are further reduction in the violations at that point when people see the violation notice from the attorney. But at the end of the day, we sent, which is in the board packet, I think it was 17 cases, John, to the attorney, which is 0.002% of all the homes in Ocean Pines. Okay? Now, there is a kind of urban legend, well, the problem is the people have been here for 40 years, they are on death's doorstep, they have no money, and we're beating on them to correct the violation. The truth of the matter is, when we dig into the ones, some of which have gone back to 2005, that simply isn't the case. Okay? And if you want to go through some properties and why our current procedures don't work, let's talk about 3 of them. Number 4, Bramblewood, should ring a bell to Larry, to Doug, to you, Tom, and to me, because the first time we ran together to get on the board. That was brought up by former Director Trendick as a big issue. It was a house with a blue tarp on the roof with thigh-high weeds. Go to that house today, it is unoccupied. You say, oh, why didn't our procedures work? Why didn't these fast, effective procedures that are in place work? Well, here's why they didn't work, okay? The heirs predeceased the owner. So we followed our procedures to the letter of the law, and we were sending letters in effect to dead people telling them to comply to our declarations of restrictions. Doesn't get too many results, okay? Take one that's more contemporary, 54 Bramblewood, okay? A case where assessments are up to date, the people have owned the property for years, it's going on for years. Somebody comes before the board and they're pleading, why do I have to deal with this year after year after year after year? Why don't you do something? So we dig in and find out, and here's some of the reasons why. Number one, okay, where I would say the procedures are about as cumbersome as you can get, the other fact of the matter, which is equally true, is there have been past general managers that have refused to follow them and implement them, okay? CPI has clearly indicated the times that they have gone to the GM for fast-track actions, and the GM has refused to follow up on it. An outright refusal to follow the procedures, okay? So that's part of it, okay? Then the third thing, and this is the poster child, we say, well, let's use the cumbersome procedures, and why don't we do them and get something done, which we've done. And we followed the procedure, we went through the attorneys, we've spent God knows how much money, and we got a court order, okay, to rectify a violation. So interestingly enough, I'm talking with a member of the media, and out of full disclosure, Tom, and Tom says, since you're on this little tirade about enforcing the DRs, maybe you want to check out this property because there's a violation there. And I didn't ring a bell, and I looked it up, and I said, oh, no, that can't be the case because we have a court order, okay? And they wouldn't violate a court order. So go check. It's a rare case where both parties are right, okay? I was correct in that I did not find a violation, which appeared to be a vehicle that was untagged. Tom was correct because I found what appeared to be 2 vehicles untagged, okay, after we had a court order. That has gone on since 2014, okay? Yeah, you know what? You're right, Joe. Our number one job is to protect homeowner value. And if we're not doing that, we're not doing our job. And that's exactly what these changes are designed to do. And here's the deal. You say won't do it, I say go to court. You know, if somebody wants to violate a court order, have at it. And let's have them pay. The other thing in the board packet, to be crystal clear to everybody in the room, our counsel has given us some advice on what this would cost. It's in writing in the board packet. We have given other counsel opportunities to challenge that. They have said, we think we can do it for less. Nobody has disputed the possibility of hitting the upper limits. That's why we want to be able to have the defense in the right language in our declarations to recoup our court costs. If somebody really does take us to the mat, and we have people that are, quite frankly, telling the ARC and telling the CPI department, we will now correct this violation when the Maryland Court of Appeals orders us to. So here's the deal. We either back down or we fight for the homeowner. And our job is to fight for the homeowners, plain and simple.
Other discussion? So I would like to mention the fact that we really do need to go back and make sure that we recommend or present this information back to the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee to kind of clear them out. I personally, and I don't know, I would certainly want to take a consensus here, but I personally would want to hear from them regarding how they would organize the number of resolutions that are associated with this process and incorporate things that are already in the DRs. So unless anybody, even though we can treat this as a first resolution, I believe, unless anybody has any problem with it, the follow-up would be, let's take this back to the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee. They're aware of these first readings and get a recommendation from them on how they would present it. Because, Frank, I think you talked about M04, you got C02, and then the creation of M10. And I certainly would rather have a recommendation from the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee, because your point is well taken with regard to some of the, we'll call it the inner workings of the minutia that's in the governance documents, and they're the best source to find out all of that information and be able to reference it accordingly. So unless anybody has a problem with that, I certainly declare this as a first reading with an action item of taking it back to the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee. Any problems with that?
I think procedurally, just to be sure, when we send a first reading to them, and maybe my expectations are not how the procedure works, we send a first reading to them. If they feel that there is something, I'll use the term in error, or something that can be done better in that first reading, they send that back to us, and we incorporate that in the second reading. And then we vote on that, and that becomes the resolution. Is my understanding of that process correct?
To answer your question, when you have a single resolution, that's fine. But here we have the possible recension of rescinding an existing resolution, creating a brand-new one, and affecting 2 or 3 others. So I think that the process in this case is a lot more complicated and a lot more integrated. So I would go to the experts and say, you understand what we're going to do at a high level, please get us to a more detailed level so we can make sure that we're making all the right moves with regard to first readings, second readings, and any changes in the resolutions.
Fair enough.
Other questions? All right, so consider this the first reading of M01 with an action item to refer back to Bylaws and Resolutions Committee. All right, so I guess I need to make a motion to, since the motion was for a first reading, then I'd like to move that we consider we accept the first reading with an amendment to refer back to Bylaws and Resolutions Committee. So I'll entertain a motion for referring back to the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of the motion as amended with regard to referring the information back to the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? None. Okay. So we'll refer that back to the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee. Now, this is a point of order. Since we don't have a parliamentarian, we'll just have to kind of go on our own guile. For example, and I'm saying this for the case of the public, all of these readings are sort of integrated with one another. So my question to my board colleagues is, do we want to talk about M10, C02, and M04, or are you more comfortable in using the initial discussions on M01 and the recommendation of taking it back to committee as a preliminary action and bypass these, or do you want to continue to discuss them while we're here, one-on-one, as more additional information for the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee?
I would think that we probably want to send it back and try to consolidate, if it has to be consolidated, or, whether rescinding the resolution and creating another one to get it back from as officially what they feel is the best way to go. I don't doubt that, Frank, that they've said, let's just do a new one. I don't have a problem with that. But it's probably a lot easier to do it that way.
So from a public persona perspective, you're not allowed to adjust the agenda of the meeting once you pass that meeting. So I'm a little bit of a dilemma. However, I think that perhaps we can, if we walk through it line item by line item, to say that, we're going to, first reading of M010, bring it up and just say refer to committee. First reading of CO2, refer to committee. So unless anybody has a problem with that, I think as a chair, I'm just going to move forward and say, since we've gotten through M01, the next item on the agenda is a first reading of M10. So I'll entertain a motion. Frank, that motion?
No, we want to have a first reading.
I'll make a motion that we do what you just said, basically.
But we can't change the agenda after we adopted the agenda. You can only do that at the beginning of the meeting.
Just read each line.
Yeah, just read each line,
And then we'll vote
we'll vote to send it to committee. And then we've met the parliamentary procedure part of it. I know it's difficult, but, I don't want to be flippant and just go, okay, let's just skip through these and take them to committee, even though that's what we're going to do. I don't want to be dinged on the fact that we didn't follow parliamentary procedures. So
The
Frank,
others will go
please.
very quickly anyway. Okay. The next one is M10. That is the replacement resolution Let me find it here.
Here it is, Frank, right here. I got it on my computer.
I think it was missing in my packet too, Frank.
Right there. Let's give that back to him when you're done.
M10, creation of resolution M10. The purpose of this is to establish policies and procedures to ensure compliance with our declarations of restrictions and architectural guidelines when violations are reported.
There's second.
Second.
All right. Discussion. I'll start. Refer to committee. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the creation of resolution M10 with the idea of pushing it back to committee, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Next item is C02. Frank?
Revision of Resolution C02. The following changes are recommended per the following. You can see 2 words are struck out of directors, general manager is included.
For second.
Second.
Discussion.
Send it to committee.
Refer to committee. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion with the requirement of sending to committee, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Next item, M04. Frank?
Revision of Resolution M04. Revised M04 as followed via the noted deletions. Delete Section 4.
Second.
Second.
Discussion?
Refer to committee.
Thank you. Seeing no more discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the revision M04 with the requirement to refer to committee, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Next item, authorize council to develop wording and instruments required for erosion bonds to obtain legal fees. Frank? Frank?
There it is, I got it. Okay. The motion to authorize council to develop the wording and instruments required for Ocean Pines to obtain legal fees for non-collection matters. Motion to authorize council to develop the wording and instruments required for Ocean Pines to obtain legal fees for non-collection matters and to begin the signature collection process. Purpose and effect. The purpose of this motion is to enable Ocean Pines to recover legal fees associated with obtaining court orders necessary to force violators into compliance with our declaration of restrictions. Okay, the background. The wording of our current declaration of restrictions does not permit Ocean Pines to recover the cost of obtaining a court order to force compliance. Here's council's explanation as to why. With respect to the ability to obtain attorney's fees in court, Maryland law follows the common American rule, which states that generally a prevailing party is not awarded attorney's fees unless 1, the parties to a contract have an agreement to that effect, and 2, there is a statute that allows the imposition of such fees, and 3, the wrongful conduct of a defendant forces a plaintiff into litigation with a third party, or 4, a plaintiff is forced to defend against malicious prosecution. It refers the case Thomas versus Gladstone in the appropriate nomenclature for that. In the homeowners association context, the recorded declaration of restrictions is the contract. What this means for OPA is, in the event OPA takes legal action in court to enforce its governing documents, such as seeking a court order to compel a member to maintain his or her lot or to authorize OPA to enter the lot, OPA would only be entitled to an award of its attorney's fees if the relevant section Declaration of Restrictions or the Maryland Homeowners Association Act authorizes the award of attorney's fees. Unlike the Maryland Condominium Act, which authorizes the award of attorney's fees for legal action brought by a condominium association, the HOA Act does not authorize the award of legal fees if a homeowners association is involved in legal action in court. The sections with no authority to obtain legal fees for non-collection matters are Section 1B, Section 1, Section 2, Section 3, Section 4, Section 5, Section 6, Section 7, Section 8, Section 9, Section 10, Section 10A, Section 11, Section 13, Section 14, Section 14B, Section 14C, Section 14D, Section 15A, and Section 18.
Is there a second? Discussion.
I had two things, two questions, yeah, I'm sorry, Doug, two things. First, who are we going to refer this to? Local counsel or Jeremy to work on that wording?
Probably, that's a good question, but I think it would be Jeremy, as they're our main counsel, and the former counsel has been really, and I'll let John explain it, retained to handle local matters, particularly those that involved violation of direct declaration of restrictions. However, Larry, both councils have been asked the same question. Both council are in agreement that we lack the wording for them to recover the costs.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. I'm just wondering that if we're going to start using the local firm, that maybe we should have them do the work on this. And that's something to be decided, I guess, later. My second,
Okay, I'm sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
my second question is this. No, I'm all for recovering our attorney's fees. My question is, what's this going to cost us? How, we're going to, if I understand the process correctly, and maybe Joe can answer yes or no by shaking his head if I'm correct, but I think we have to go back and go through the process of having each section vote on these DRs and approve it. And there has to be, a 50% approval rate by each section in the association to approve the DR, or to approve this change. And if in fact that's the case, what's that going to cost us? And are we really going to recover those fees anyway? That's my,
The answer, it's a matter of risk. Here's what, it's in the packet, the opinion of the attorney. But actually, what you'd need, and let's use, like, I think Section 1 as an example. You need an instrument with a signature on it from the majority of the people that vote in Section 1 to incorporate that change in the Declaration of Restrictions, okay? Now, how much that would cost, okay, and what that instrument looks like. I mean, he said it could be a petition, it could be like a card that they send back with their signature on it. You know, my guess is you're looking at something that's on the order of what an election would be in those sections, okay? Could be.
No, I have a, Larry, you done?
yeah,
All right,
they're
so
the
I-
questions I have on
Yeah,
it.
I have a comment. It does involve costs. So clearly, the mechanism in which we would have to reach out to each one of the sections and the costs associated with that, plus the costs associated to development of the language is certainly there. Earlier in this meeting, we talked about 0.02% of the homeowners. You know, at what point, if we're going to make a fairly large investment, you know, in making this happen, we're only talking about dealing with 0.02% of our homeowners, is it worth it? And I'm not saying yes or no, that's a question in my mind, is it okay? Now, the other side of that, and I'm going to argue with myself, is that, but I understand we also need a mechanism, an instrument, some way to do some level of enforcement. I would offer, if there's some conjunction between our requirement just now to send a lot of things back to the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee, maybe we look at them first and say, what are they saying with regard to the resolutions? And then how do we make that to sort of, you know, align with what's in the DRs before we make the investment? Because we may find something out based on their expertise and their research that may be able to help us to control the costs if we decide to move forward and it makes sense to move forward. So I think there's a little bit more work that needs to be done there. I like the concept, but I'm not ready to say, personally that we want to move forward with them developing the language, because they don't know what language they want to develop yet. And I think there's a lot of intersection points, there's a lot of things that, are intertwined with regard to anything that we do that has not only, Maryland law, not only the HOA law, but our bylaws and, and our declarations of restrictions and our resolutions. So I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done there. I think Colette had her hand up first. Go ahead. Colette.
Do we have any idea how much these attorney costs are that we're going to recover per case?
Yeah, well, here, look, okay.
Is that a yes or a no?
Well, it's going to give you an answer.
Okay.
It's kind of a dilemma, Colette, because here's, in the board packet, here's exactly what our attorneys have told us. Okay, the exact question that they were asked was, how much would it cost to get a court order? Okay, counsel in writing said the range of a court order could be up to $50,000. They said their experience is that normally it is $12,000 to $18,000. Okay, they said that cost depends on a number of things. It depends on, number one, the degree of fight that the violator has. If they retain an attorney and you go through depositions and you go through discovery and they decide to fight with you, okay, you could get into the upper numbers. Now, the counterbalance to that, which I think Doug is saying, and this is what our previous counsel has said and what the CPI group has said based on the past, is typically when you get into these situations and you go to the initial court order and you show up down at court, that the violators typically want to settle before they get before the judge. And you don't go through depositions and you don't go through discovery. But to quell the laughter from the media section, counsel has been asked point blank, current and previous, are these numbers wrong? And nobody has disputed that we could hit the upper limit. If we have somebody, like somebody right now, who's saying, I'll see you in the Maryland Court of Appeals. So it's an issue of risk, okay? And I don't think we have the choice not to enforce and not to demand speedy enforcement and speedy correction or violations of declarations of restrictions. The question is how much risk do we want to take? Because there are 17 cases, and even if you just look at some just point blank easy numbers, okay? A filing fee is $165, okay? It's going to take an attorney, okay, local attorney, 30 minutes to go down to Snow Hill to file and 30 minutes to come back. That time's not free. It's going to take them time to prepare that, okay? The difference between over the bridge and local is not in the hourly rate. The difference is in the travel time from Montgomery County down to Snow Hill and back that we'd be paying for, okay? So the issue is you're probably looking at each one of these 17 cases that John has, probably within shouting distance of $1,000 minimum.
Of those 17 cases, only 9 of them are in sections that need the text revision.
Tom, you were next.
Do we have any numbers on, say, Bramblewood? Is there a number, how much money we've spent so far on attorney's fees? Is there a clue? Do we have a clue? I mean, we've had some of these that have been going on now for 3 boards prior. Is there any number of how much, does anybody have any clue how much the attorneys we've paid over and over to send letters and do all this legwork?
We do have those numbers, Tom, but don't have.
Excuse me, Robert's
have no
Rules of
way to
Order
go
are still in
back.
effect. Harry.
Frank, I agree with what you're saying, but, in my own career, I've been involved in hundreds of litigation cases. I mean, hundreds. And the reality of it is, the majority of the cases are going to be settled. Very few are going to go to court. And as we have seen in the recent past here, as normally happens in litigation, in order to reach settlement, generally what happens is the plaintiffs, and in our case, in this situation would be us, we will agree, that's just what happens, to waive any of those costs or fees so that we can get the homeowner to comply. That's the reality of how the litigation will go. That's what will happen if we get involved in a mediation. And that's what will happen if the attorney knows what he's doing for the homeowner, the defendant in this case. That's what they're going to look for to resolve the case. And quite honestly, I think, I would like to see us get the fees back. I just don't think from a realistic standpoint, we're not going to settle a case to reach compliance, which is what our main objective is. If we're not going to, if the homeowner says, well, I'll do what you need me to do, but I'm not paying any attorney's fees. And what's going to happen? We're going to say, because again, my experience over hundreds and hundreds of cases is, all right, let's get the compliance taken care of because that's the most important thing, and the fees will be waived. And so that goes back to my question. What's it going to cost us to do this in every section that has to have it done? And what's the reality of us recovering any of those fees anyway? We may have a big case. Bramblewood may be a big case. But as we've seen, most of these cases, they're resolved before we get to that point.
Most will not go, most will not go under.
Please be recognized by the chair. Frank?
Yeah, clearly, most of them, it's 100%, Larry, a question of what is the board's appetite for the risk? Because if they not go under and, okay, let's say we spend $17,000 to clean up everything and have, right now, 0 cases outstanding, okay? We've done our job as a homeowners association. And I think you can make an argument that the 8,452 assessment payers have all contributed to that, and that's part of the dues of being part of the association, okay? And I would be perfectly accepting of that. Where things will hit the fan is if you have one that goes to the Maryland Court of Appeals and it costs us in 6 figures, and the legal fees go through the ceiling, and we haven't taken the steps necessary to recover the cost, if the judge would feel compelled to give them to us.
Barry?
Well, and again, the other point to this, and I'd love to see us get all this money back. The reality of it is, how many of these cases do we have where the people, or Tom had mentioned early on, where they just don't have the money, or regardless whether the court awards the fees and costs anyway, are we going to get it? So.
All right.
Doug, just
Camilla?
one final comment. I think that the conversation that we're having here is very, very interesting, but I would err on the side of at least having the leverage. We have the leverage to attain legal fees in various cases. We can, as a plaintiff, we can waive those legal fees. We can do whatever we want, but at least gives us some bargaining power. And I would like to see us move forward with that. I have been in cases, and I have settled most of my cases in this regard, and I have waived legal fees. Absolutely, I have done that in the best interest of trying to get cases resolved for plaintiffs. But I think we need the leverage.
All right, I think we've talked. I'll entertain one more comment. Any other?
If I can,
Yes,
thank you.
Tom, thank you.
My God, man, I don't know if you have to throw stuff. But to answer, to go right back to Larry's point, the fact is, you stated in all the cases that you've done, your negotiation was to waive fees. At this point, we can't charge fees. So
That's right.
what do we have to waive? We don't have an opportunity to negotiate. They just go, you know what, you can't charge us fees anyway. I don't know how it'll work. I'm not a lawyer. But I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express. I'm just saying, if you're saying that we waive fees in order to negotiate compliance, then that would be great if we had fees. Since we don't have fees, there's nothing to waive. And that's it. Now you don't have to take my questions.
All right, we've kind of beat through this. The idea here is hopefully we've got enough information to make a vote. So seeing no more, I'll close the floor for discussion and call the question. All those in favor of the motion as presented, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? Vote.
I'm opposed.
Right, I'm opposed. Please, no recount. All those in favor, please say aye. Hold your hand.
Aye.
That's three. All those, that's what I did. I said show of hands, please. That's three. All those opposed? Four. Okay, the motion is defeated. All right, next item on the agenda has been added based on us amending the agenda. It's a first reading of F-03. Larry?
I move to amend Resolution F-03 as listed in the package that I've given to you. In essence, this is the motion that I presented at our last board meeting and withdrew because it is properly handled by amending Resolution F-03. And for the board's edification, after the last meeting, Jim Trummel and I sat down, went through the resolution, and actually Jim, after our discussions, did prepare the changes to F-03. So I'll just go ahead and read the red line changes.
First of all, you have to
Oh,
read the
I'm sorry.
motion. It has to be seconded, and then we can move into discussion.
Okay.
All right, so you've read the motion for a change to F-03. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, discussion. Larry, please.
Okay, so let me read get into the background. Current funding of the new capital requires the board to budget projects through the operational budget. The effect of new capital costs are directly added to the annual assessment. Controlling the increase in the annual assessment has and can continue to cause this and future boards to attempt to control assessment increases by not making necessary new capital purchases. The discussion, a reserve account dedicated to new capital expenditures will allow for better financial planning and control without directly impacting the association's yearly assessment. It will also eliminate the tendencies to forego necessary new capital purchases and projects because of the direct impact on the annual assessment. And as I said, the changes to F-03 would include at Section 4, we would be adding D, which under reserve accounts would be new capital reserve. This reserve is for assets with functionality that were never previously owned by OPA. There are various small letter changes because of the changes in the, by adding that section. The next major change is at 8, and it is new capital reserve funding and controls. A, funding for this account will come from up to 10% of the yearly replacement reserve. B, the account shall not exceed $1 million after the yearly contribution as of the new fiscal year. A maximum of $500,000 may be spent in any one fiscal year. And then there are a couple other number changes to the paragraphs. Again, the changes were done in conjunction with Jim Trummel to make sure that that the bylaws committee would be on board. And there we are.
The comments?
Questions? Okay. My understanding of our current reserve situation is that we conducted a reserve study from DMA, and that the Budget and Finance Committee established target ranges that each reserve should be in for us to feel comfortable, and that with the exception of the road reserve, we are either at the minimum or approaching the minimum for each of, approaching it but not hitting the minimum for each of those accounts. Is that factually correct?
Yes. Currently, we're, based on the reserve study, the Budget and Finance Committee, as approved by the board, our projected goals for our replacement reserve account. And this, again, this does not affect bulkheads or roads. For the replacement reserve account was 22 to 28%. We are at 18%, and by initiating this process for the upcoming budget year, this would delay us getting to the 22% goal. Instead of getting there in 3 years, we would get there in 4 years. So it's delaying it by 1 year. If, that's if, we allocated 10% of the incoming reserve dollars. Now, the motion says that we would do up to 10% and not a straight 10% every year. The idea being that based on what is presented during the budget and finance process, what projected new capital spends are reviewed and approved, then we would, my thought process would be that if in fact we thought we were going to spend $100,000 in new capital, that we would probably want to increase, take, maybe $150,000 from those replacement reserves, put it in this account, and over time, build this reserve, new capital reserve account, as opposed to dealing with exactly what John talked about earlier today, where we have $12,000 of new capital that was purchased this year because of because we're not capitalizing anything under $5,000, and that goes directly onto it goes onto the operational budget that, first off, is not budgeted for because it's under $5,000. So it would address those issues from an operational standpoint, as well as instead of making decisions on new capital expenditures, and as you know from past budget processes, the board is very concerned about raising the assessments, as we should be, and eliminating projects that could be small things, mostly are small things, because we talked about the numbers. We're only averaging about $150,000 a year in new capital expenditures, which does not include the projects that have been that have been requested year after year that were not approved. So while I understand what your question is, Frank, I don't think that delaying getting to that 22% goal of our replacement reserve dollars, I don't see that as an issue, because we're not talking about a tremendous amount of money.
That leads to the second question. We talk about it's not impacting assessment, but $200 of the current assessment goes into the replacement reserves. So if 200 is going in and we're draining money out to fund this new account, then, and it's causing us to be below our targets, then as we consistently spend that $150,000, then we're either going to consistently be below our targets, or we're going to have to increase our assessment to cover our reserves.
No.
Explain that to me.
The projections, we ran the projections, and I think I sent the spreadsheet out to you guys probably 2 months ago, that building in that 10% draw off the replacement reserves delays us getting to the 22% goal by 1 more year. We're not there now. We're not going to be there next year. It's going to take us 3 years to get to that 22%, even if we don't take money out and shift it to new capital. It'll delay it by 1 year. And then, and in 4 years, we will be at 22%, and that percentage will increase as we move forward.
I have a couple of questions and concerns. So when you're looking at item number 8, new capital, the amounts shall not exceed $1 million after the yearly contributions in new fiscal and a maximum of $500,000. Well, if I look at the numbers that that's been bannered about with regard to the amount of capital expenses we've had over the years, are these numbers out of proportion? I mean, we're funding something at a high rate, borrowing off, let me finish this because it'll take a while. We're borrowing off of or shifting off of the reserve account to build something out, and then we're stockpiling at a different rate than we're actually spending. So my question would be, why are we trying to get 10% of the reserve funding to put something in there that we've traditionally not had that level of spending? Second part of my concern, where's the plan? Where do we have a list of things that are upcoming capital asks? All right, I have not seen that. Our strategic planning committee is quite not functioning right now. It's not their fault, just there hasn't been any push to do that. I, for one, have no interest in putting money into an account without a plan on what we're going to do to use it. All right, and I've said that before. I said that at the other meeting. I will not support this blind faith, oh, let's just take 10% of reserve. Quite frankly, and I'll assume, although I shouldn't trust but verify, that moving money out of the reserve account into a capital account, whether it's legally we can do that or whether it's, just a poor use of sort of accounting procedures, don't know. But, that's another cause of concern. Reading back through the general definition of reserves, which are the portions of net equity association appropriated for future use and specific purposes, not including reserves or non-appropriated equity and equity invested in fixed assets. So the question would be, can we even do that, by taking it out? Now, I know there's a provision in the bylaws that said we can actually, by, was it supermajority, 2/3, can actually pull out monies from the reserve in an emergency, but I don't know if one could argue that this is an actual emergency that we're dealing with. So let me finish. Okay. So again, my concern is twofold. Number one, the funding levels. Number two, the funding mechanism. Number three, the plan. All right, because, and then we get to that point, then you're going to hear me ask about, okay, authority for disbursement of the expenses. How do we control that? I've said that in the past already, in the past two meetings. What are we doing to control this expense? Any floor directors can come in and got $1 million to build a bowling alley. All right, I don't ascribe to that approach. There's got to be, if we're spending a lot of time. The other thing, if you look at the resolutions, there's also a provision to allow for multi-year budgets. Okay, so we're looking at something that carries over to another year. If we're managing that account, okay, are you just managing it for a year? No, you'll never manage a capital improvement or a capital expense fund for a single year. You're going to look at a multi-year project, and it could be that it takes that long not only to build a plan, justify the expense, and then actually deliver it. So again, I just have a little bit of a concern that we're not hitting the target here. I get the concept is sound, but I'm still not feeling that we've got the right mechanism in place that allows the controls that I think are absolutely required in order for us to manage the association's funds properly with regard to new capital purchases.
Can I address that?
Please.
Okay. First off, the issue of planning is a process that occurs during the Budget and Finance Committee every year. There's a plan put together, and as part of this, the general manager will be preparing, as we have discussed this year. We will start keeping a rolling new capital project plan. So, does one exist today? No, but it will be developed as the projects or items are recommended by the department heads during this budget process. That's the same process that occurs every year. In regard to putting the money aside and then any four directors coming in and deciding to pull the money out and spend it, we can do the same thing with the replacement reserve account. So quite honestly, I don't buy that argument. The board can do that at any time. This account, while you may think $1 million and $500,000 is a lot of money, the reason those numbers are in there today is anticipation of what may be down the road 10, 15, 20 years from now, so that the resolution doesn't have to go back and be changed. If those numbers are, when you look at the control of only allocating up to 10%, and this coming year, our replacement reserve number will be about $2 million, so we would be looking at a maximum, $200,000 going into that account. If we are spending about $150,000 on average on new capital expenditures, I don't see what the issue is. What it does is it removes that direct impact on our assessments, and it removes the motivation of the board not to approve projects or items, and this is not just projects, this is items that are that the association may need, or to improve the quality of life here in the association. Having sat through the budget process the last 2 years on the Budget and Finance Committee, and in the past as just a homeowner, watching the board struggle with getting things done here, it ultimately comes back to how much are we willing to raise the assessment? And that's the problem, because items and things that would have benefited this community have been delayed, because we don't have a mechanism in place to take that assessment increase away. Your questions are all valid, Doug, but the planning issue was done every budget process. That's nothing new. John and I have discussed it from the general manager standpoint. There will be an ongoing plan. And actually, you know, it was something that, one of the good things that JB recommended, that we have a plan, a list of items, whether it be a project or, you know, some other piece of equipment that we need, that can go on that list so that it can be properly managed. That, the Budget and Finance Committee and the board currently manages that, and we would still manage that. So how it's being controlled, that's for us to control through the budget process.
Frank?
On the issue of controls, you know, I think that the truth is that planning seems to ebb and flow. There have been times where there hasn't been capital plans, and there have been times when they have been in place. And I think that we need additional controls to make sure that if a capital plan disappears because of an administration change down the road, 5, 10, X number of years, that no money's moved. Second thing I want to talk about is alternative funding, because at one time, we at least discussed the park mechanism, which truly avoids the assessments, okay? And I read the thing where the Budget and Finance Committee said they prefer this method over that method. But my question is, did somebody run a hard set of numbers against what could happen, even before we run any numbers? Number one, I don't know that we can legally do that, so that approach may be killed. And by the way, Larry, just so I agree we need a new capital fund, but I would like to see first off, can we do the park approach Ocean Pines wide? Because they clearly avoid the assessment issue. Second of all, against a real set of numbers, a plan that John's developing that'll be here, I guess, by December 1st. Okay, can we run, if we can do that, that set of numbers to see what the impact would be in terms of both building this fund and what it would be on the assessment? Because just theoretically, from something you told me, if we sold 400 houses last year, one of your concerns was we'd have this enormous fund to build up, okay? But if we can do that at a reduced rate from what they do at the park, which is $1,000 a house, as I understand it, okay? You can build this fund over time, and when you hit $1 million, it seems to me that you can have a control mechanism in there that says when you hit $1 million, then you allocate those funds to the reserve accounts that are worst case underfunded, not within the ratios. And that is a true reduction in the assessment. But I haven't seen, I mean, I don't know if we can legally do it, and I haven't seen a set of numbers to prove that out one way or the other against this method. I'm open to this method, but I would like to look at that other method as an alternative, because it's intriguing in that it truly gets what you want, a capital fund, and truly bypasses the assessment mechanism.
Larry?
Okay, so let's talk about the numbers, and let's talk about the parks process. And again, this was all reviewed through the Budget and Finance Committee, and as you said, Frank, they were strongly against it. So we sell, and I went back and checked, we sell about 50 homes a year in Ocean Pines. Oh, I'm sorry, 452 in Ocean Pines. In the park, of that, about 50 of them are in the park.
Okay.
Okay, so $1,000 for those 50 homes is $50,000 for the park. If we were to do that $1,000, that would be $400,000 here. Now, whether we did it at a smaller number, you know, that's another issue. But, you know, I heard last time the old refrain, you're building a slush fund. I don't accept that. $400,000, even if we did it at $500, that we would be asking people again at settlement to put up $500 more. It's $200,000 a year. Over 10 years, that's going to be $2 million. And I would think that once we start that process, we're not going to be able to stop it.
Right.
So now you're talking about taking that money and shifting it somewhere else. Now we're talking about doing another resolution. And the Budget and Finance Committees, and I agree with this, the last thing we want to do is add another charge at closing for people who are buying a home here in Ocean Pines. So that's why that process that they're using in the park, which may work well for the park, is not being recommended by the Budget and Finance Committee. So they're not recommending it, and I agree with it. I don't think that's the way we ought to go. Again, the numbers we're talking about here, you know, even at full 10% a year, we're talking $200,000. And if we're spending an average of $150,000 for this account to build up to $1 million, it's going to take 20 years. And in 20 years, we may need that $1 million in there. So the other control is the $500,000 a year spend. We're not spending $500,000 a year today on capital, new capital. So those numbers are, in reality, sort of irrelevant because we're not going to be taking that much money and we're not going to be spending that much money today. And again, I just want to, again, this idea that 4 guys are going to come in here, or ladies, and decide to build a bowling alley, they could do that anyway and take the money out of the replacement reserves. There's nothing to stop them from doing that. And that's the reality of it. So.
What?
I just wanted to second that I am not in favor of the park plan at all. I don't want to add anything to anybody's closing costs for this kind of a fund. I think the plan that Larry has laid out makes a lot of sense to me. I think it has minimal impact. And I think the controls are there. I do see in the budget processes I've been through, each department puts forth some items that they want for capital spend. We evaluate those, but I've seen those stymied. Of course, the 2 years I've been on the board, we've been dealing with the deficit. And so there's been no capital spend, or very little capital spend. And, you know, I'm not anticipating that we're going to continue to be in a negative position. We're doing very well now, and I think we're going to continue. But I really believe that this is a sound plan. I think the controls are there, and, you know, I definitely support this concept.
Other discussion? Tom?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Doug. I don't like putting together a fund for projects that aren't on the books, that are just wish list projects. That's why we do the budget every year. We've had problems 2 years before and 3 years before because we have had no income. We've been losing money right and left. Now that we're finally making money, it looks easy to just take 10% from the reserve account, start a new capital account just in case. And how much did we spend last year in new capital? Was it like $56,000 or something? Wasn't it really small a number? Huh?
Small.
Yeah, very small. So, I mean, it was just something that we didn't include. So I just don't like putting together a fund that builds over every year. I'm not going to be on the board forever. I don't know who's going to be in charge, but I don't want $500,000 to $1 million just sitting there that any 4 board members can take and do whatever they like with. Put it in the budget if you want it done. If Colby wants something done next year, we put it in the budget, we figure out if we can afford to do it, and we do it. If we can't do it, then we make more money next year at the yacht club or wherever else. We cut payroll or whatever John's doing to make our numbers look so great, and we keep adding all these wonderful things in. I didn't mean your payroll, I just meant someone's payroll. My point is that we're going in the right direction. I don't really want to put in, I don't like making a
Tommy.
fund for future projects we don't have, because the money's just gonna be sitting there, and it's gonna be too easy for someone to go and use it.
Can I address that too?
Hold on one second.
Might I, Larry, just one last comment. I do have to support and concur with the thoughts put forth by Colette and Larry. This community is aging, and I really, really think that we need to be cognizant of that and be prepared for that. Doug, with all due respect for you, I think that you've shown leadership that a board like this needs, and you're setting a template. I hope that template continues. I have every faith that it will. And I think that this is a very sound way to go. I, too, would hate to see additional costs put on at closing because I think it's a detriment. So I would be in favor of this proposal.
Larry?
Yeah, and I just wanted to go back to address one of the issues that Tom had. Tom, you're exactly right. We didn't spend a lot on new capital this year. We're probably only going to spend, I think $12,000, John, is that the number? And the reason is because we've been watching our pennies because of the financial situation we're in. And that's great. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things out there that should be done, that can be done if we properly manage our accounts. And again, I sat down with, I'm not a financial genius, but I sat down with some financial geniuses and went through this plan with them. And they concur that for what we need to do in this association, that this is the best way to do it. So I would,
So, again, all good conversation. One of the things in listening to all this, it kind of occurred to me that perhaps, and I want to get some feedback, is, we've had this strategic planning committee on the books, okay? I think now it's time, because I'd hate to have everything coming directly from the Budget and Finance Committee, because that's always going to be, and this is not meant to be slighted, but it's always going to come from this sort of financial, analytical, viewpoint of pure dollars and cents. Perhaps it's time to get the Strategic Planning Committee to look at it from a more holistic, maybe a different perspective, and then obviously, sort of coordinate with not only the Budget and Finance Committee, but the board, since they're an advisory committee, to come up with this understanding of what really needs to be done over the next 5 to 10 years. Cameron, your point was well taken. We are an aging community, and then Larry, your point was well taken, the fact that we have been watching our pennies, and we have been kind of saying, well, no, let's not add that, because I've been through 4 budget processes now, and we tend to go, no, let's hold off on that, let's see how much more we can do that. But so, again, other than, the idea of, taking it out of the funding reserves, I would also add that I think the park scenario is intriguing, but, I don't know, would it be a deterrent? In other words, you mentioned 400 and some odd houses every year. If they know they got to spend an extra amount of that, does that turn into 275 houses a year? I don't know. Another deterrent in living Ocean Pines. Of course, I like to think that if they're buying a $300,000 house, $500 is not going to sway them one way or the other. But it's a point well taken. So, I wonder if and I'm, again, I don't want to paint the wrong picture. I'm in support of some funding mechanism for capital purchases, okay? So we have to put it in place, and if it's agreement, the majority of the board believes, taking 10% of the reserve or up to 10% of the reserves in order to do that, that's fine. I'll be bird dogging the idea of, authorizing the spending and bird dogging the idea of strategic planning, okay? Because again, I want the association members to know, here's what's on the docket. Here's what we're looking at over the next 3 to 5 years. Do you concur? Are there things that we should be doing that aren't on this list? And start to formulate a plan, and I think it's exactly what the Strategic Planning Committee should be doing, canvassing our membership along with our help and getting that information from the community into us so we can start putting items on that, rather than, I don't know if it's terms of good one, rather the wish list, okay, for capital purchases, and then turn around, start to substantiate them, place the business case, and then justify the expense of. As long as that's happening, I'll feel comfortable, but absent of those kinds of A, planning efforts, and B, controls, you're still going to hear me up here going, I don't use that old term that somebody else said, slush fund, but, I will watch that like a hawk, because I will, in my tenure, I just will not want to let that happen. So, but generally, I agree with, you know, the notion. Again, by the way, we're not deciding anything tonight. This is a first reading, okay? So, but it's just good discussion. We're not voting on anything tonight, all right? So so I tell you, in the interest of time, we do have a lot of other things to take care of. So in the interest of time, I'll entertain one more comment. Frank, you get the closing comment.
Okay, two things. Look, I agree, we need a new capital fund. And funding methods aside, because some things are more intriguing than the others, I mean, I could live with this if we had the additional control mechanism in there that clearly stated, no funds are moved in no year where we don't have a capital improvement plan, long-term, from the general manager approved by the board.
Can I address that?
I said
This
one
is
more
the last
comment.
thing, well, because
I
this
said
goes
one more
back.
comment. Let's close it.
This goes to the discussions that Jim Trumbull and I had, Frank, and if you remember from when I presented this motion, I had stricter controls on this thing, and what you're asking to do, we can't do, because the board can go ahead and move the money anyway. It's just like the replacement reserve fund, we can say whatever we want, but you know, 2/3 come in and say, this is what we're gonna do. That's what the bylaws say.
By the way, I just had a reading to rescind a motion. I understand, okay? But I would still like to state it. One other thing, Doug, and was the second part of my
Okay.
last comment.
How many more? This is the last comment.
It was the
okay?
strategic planning. Look, I think that strategic planning should definitely take center stage. It's been with the last general managers. I think it should be a work group. We can't have a committee write a plan for John and his team to execute. It has to be a plan that maybe John has resources in the community, and that committee, which hasn't met, has tremendous resources that have expertise in this area. But as a work group, it would be more functional because it has to be his plan that we approve, not some committee's plan that goes some circular around. That's why we never got anywhere. It has to be an operating plan approved by the board.
All right, understood. We'll, point taken, we'll have to address that. All right. Seeing no more discussion, I just want to recognize that we don't have to really vote on anything. We just have to recognize that a first reading of F03 has been accomplished, so please note that in our meeting minutes. That concludes new business for the day. Next item on the agenda are appointments. There are actually two more based on the amended agenda. Ken Wolf is Chair of the Environmental and Natural Assets Committee. Mo Delcher, first-term Strategic Planning. George Solyak, first-term Budget and Finance. Brian Reynolds, first-term Budget and Finance. Unless there is an aversion to taking all four of those appointments at once, I'd entertain a motion to accept all four appointments.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. Any discussion on any one of the members? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the four appointments as noted, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right, please note that those appointments are made. Next item on the agenda is an adjournment to closed session. I'll entertain a motion for that.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Please, Colette, please read the,
We have
it was actually stated at the beginning of the meeting.
two motions. One, to discuss matters pertaining to employees and personnel, specifically pertaining to extension of the general manager's contract. The second one is to discuss terms or conditions of a business transaction in the negotiation stage, specifically pertaining to contracting for staging area for the bulkhead program.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? All right, meeting's adjourned in a closed session. Thank you.